People see that with Eamonn and I on TV, you know, so I say, well, we don't row, actually. And people say, oh, they argue. I say, we don't. It's just I don't always agree with him. And just because he's my husband, I'll never always agree with him. So, and I can't be that person that doesn't voice that opinion.
For nearly 3 decades, Ruth Langsford and Eamonn Holmes were the king and queen of British daytime TV, a portrait of relatable bickering bliss. But in 2024, the facade crumbled, leaving fans blindsided. Today, at 66, Ruth is finally breaking her silence. What really happened behind the closed doors of their Surrey mansion? Tonight, we peel back the polished layers. The announcement. On Saturday, May 2024, Ruth Langsford's spokesman released a rather brief joint statement confirming that the British television presenters, Ruth Langsford and Eamonn Holmes, were filing for a divorce after 14 years of marriage. For millions of people across the UK and beyond, this news hit hard. They weren't just another celebrity couple. They were seemingly the unbreakable king and queen of daytime television. The reaction online was instant, with social media platforms flooded with comments from fans who were genuinely heartbroken. Initially, it was thought to be fake news or something. Online was playing an expensive prank. But as time went on, it seemed the news of the divorce was real. This sense of disbelief came from the fact that the couple had been together for nearly 28 years. The news of the divorce was really a hard pill to swallow, and it felt like a glitch in the matrix of British pop culture. Now, the divorce announcement wasn't the only surprising thing. Reports came out saying that while their divorce was announced in May, the couple had been separated for months, and nobody knew about it. However, there were subtle hints that no one ever thought to question. Looking back at the early months of 2024, the clues were hidden in plain sight. Ruth, being a public figure, has always been very active on social media, often sharing snippets of her and her husband's lives at their Surrey mansion. But during those early months, Eamonn was nowhere to be found in her posts. Let's just say none could have really figured it out, since she always appeared on the talk show Loose Women wearing her wedding ring. The contrast between their public image and their private reality was a lot. On the This Morning sofa, their chemistry was built on playful arguments that made viewers adore them. However, behind the scenes, it seems the two were not the happy couple they once were, at least more recently. With the divorce now a reality, it only leaves fans questioning the reason behind it. It makes them wonder if the split was caused by their different career paths, or if something much more personal had broken the bond. While Eamonn dealt with mounting health issues and a very public exit from his longtime network, it seemed the pressure on the marriage became an unbearable load. It couldn't have just been a simple disagreement that ended things. There had to be a pile of resentment and change that had been building for years. To understand why Britain's favorite couple fell apart, we have to go back to the beginning, before they were both caught up in the spotlight. The making of a television icon. Long before she was a household name, Ruth Langsford was what people call an army brat. This was because her father was a sergeant major, so most of her childhood was spent on the move. She lived in places like Germany, Singapore, and North Africa. She never really had friends for long, and it kind of forced her to learn how to live independently. For Ruth, this became her secret weapon. It made her grounded, and this attribute would eventually make her a star. Her career didn't start till she began working for a regional station called Television Southwest in the 1980s. She started at the bottom, doing everything from announcing shows to basic news reporting. This was the era of big hair and even bigger personalities, yet Ruth stood out by being remarkably normal. She gained a reputation for being the ultimate professional. While others were chasing fame for the sake of being famous, Ruth was focusing on the work. She was composed, reliable, and possessed an easy charm. Transitioning to the London media circuit in the 90s was a massive hurdle. At that time, the television industry was very much a boys' club, and women were often expected to be little more than sidekicks or decoration. Ruth had to fight to be taken seriously as a lead presenter. She spent those years building a thick skin and learning how to navigate a high-pressure environment. She was living in the big city, working her way up the ladder, and proving she had what it took for national television. Despite her growing fame, she remained fiercely protective of her personal life. People often forget that she had a whole world outside of the cameras. She was very close to her parents and her sister, Julia. Even as the London tabloids started to take notice of her, she kept her family out of the media. She had a sense of independence that no woman during that time would have ever imagined. She had her own apartment, her own thriving career, and her own bank account. She was already a success in her own right. By the mid-90s, she was a polished, confident woman who had conquered the regional markets and was ready for something bigger. She was a rising star in her own right, but a fateful introduction in 1997 would change the trajectory of her life forever. As a growing name in the media, especially as a female presenter, it was only a matter of time for her to make it big. But life had other plans for her when she crossed paths with Eamonn Holmes. She and Eamonn met when their mutual friend, Sally Mean, introduced them both. Their connection was instant, and from there, they took it off. But there was a massive hurdle standing in their way at the time. Eamonn was still legally married to his first wife, Gabrielle. Although they were separated, the situation was a bit sensitive, especially as they were rising figures in the media. Eamonn had 3 children from his first marriage, and his priority was making sure they weren't hurt by a media frenzy. Because of this, Ruth and Eamonn spent the first several years of their relationship in secret. They went to great lengths to stay out of the gossip columns. They would often arrive at parties in separate cars and leave through different doors. By the time Eamonn's divorce was finalized in 2005, they had already built a life together behind closed doors. A major turning point arrived in 2002 with the birth of their son Jack. During that time, there were suspicions that the two were together, and the birth of their child confirmed it. As big names in the media and entertainment, they weren't like the typical dramatic celebrity couples who were always in the news for the wrong reasons. They seemed like a staple who had everything figured out even if they weren't married. 13 years after their first meeting, they finally decided to walk down the aisle. Their 2010 wedding at Elvetham Hall was a beautiful, star-studded affair. Surrounded by friends, family, and famous colleagues, they didn't just become a couple, they became a brand. But as their professional lives merged, the line between being partners and co-workers began to blur. The This Morning dynasty. This transition came from when they landed their iconic Friday slot on ITV's flagship show, This Morning. For years, Friday mornings in the UK belonged to Ruth and Eamonn. They were the relatable alternative to the polished perfection often seen on daytime television. Their trademark was a unique brand of bickering that felt incredibly authentic. One minute, they would be interviewing a Hollywood star, and the next, they would be arguing over who forgot to load the dishwasher. Audiences loved it because it mirrored their own relatable, real-life marriages. The reality of their workday was much more intense than it looked from a living room sofa. A typical day involved 6.5 hours of high-pressure live television. In that environment, there is nowhere to hide. If emotions were high between them, the viewers would most likely pick up on it. This constant proximity meant they were together almost 24 hours a day. While many couples get a break from each other during the work week, Ruth and Eamonn were locked into a shared schedule under hot studio lights and millions of watchful eyes. Naturally, the tension behind the scenes occasionally leaked onto the screen. Eamonn was known for being outspoken and sometimes unpredictable. He wasn't afraid to ruffle feathers or say exactly what was on his mind, even if it was controversial. Ruth often found herself playing the role of the mediator. She was the one who kept the show on track and smoothed things over with the producers when Eamonn went off script. She was the ultimate professional, ensuring the ship stayed upright while her husband provided the unpredictable energy that kept the ratings high. During this peak period, they were the undisputed royalty of the media landscape. They were fixtures on every major red carpet and frequently picked up awards for their work. Their influence was massive, and they were seen as a safe, stable force in a chaotic industry. However, the fame came with a hidden cost. It became increasingly difficult to leave the office at the studio, when your coworker is also the person you share a bed with. the work talk never really stops. They struggled to transition back to being a normal husband and wife once the cameras stopped rolling. The stresses of the newsroom and the demands of the producers followed them through the front door of their home. The dynamic that made them famous was also the thing that started to wear them down. They had built a life where their relationship was a product to be sold to the public. This added a layer of performance to their daily lives that was hard to maintain. They were living in a world of constant scrutiny, and the pressure to stay at the top was relentless. They seemed invincible on the sofa, but the first cracks didn't come from a lack of love. They came from a corporate axe that no one saw coming. The beginning of the end. In late 2020, the news broke that ITV was shaking up the lineup for This Morning. Ruth and Eamonn were being replaced in their regular Friday slot by Alison Hammond and Dermot O'Leary. To the public, it looked like a standard television refresh, but to the couple, it felt like betrayal. They were relegated to holiday coverage, which was essentially a demotion after years of loyal service. Eamonn didn't take it lightly, and this wasn't a pill he could swallow easily. He had spent decades as a top-tier broadcaster, and being sidelined took a massive toll on his ego and mental health. While he was vocal about his frustration, Ruth handled the situation differently. She managed to survive the purge and kept her prestigious role as a lead anchor on Loose Women. This created a strange new dynamic in their home. Ruth was still a golden girl at ITV, while Eamonn was quickly becoming their loudest critic. As their career paths moved in opposite directions, a sense of resentment began to brew. Eamonn eventually left the network entirely and moved to GB News, a much more controversial and opinionated platform. Ruth remained in the mainstream, playing it safe and professional within the very corporation her husband was now attacking. Eamonn started a public dispute with his former bosses, calling out the management and the culture at ITV, putting Ruth in an incredibly awkward and compromised position. She was the one who had to walk into those hallways every day and smile at the people her husband was bashing in the headlines. And of course, this not only affected their work lives, it also affected their personal lives. It seemed their shared career identity, the very thing that had bound them together for so long, was gone. They were no longer the duo that dominated the morning airwaves. Instead, they were two people working for rival teams with very different philosophies. Eamonn became a vocal outsider, while Ruth stayed a corporate insider. The common ground they stood on for 20 years was crumbling beneath their feet. The loss of their professional partnership was the beginning of a long drift. The Eamonn and Ruth brand was officially broken. Without the shared goals and the daily collaboration at the studio, they found themselves staring at each other across the dinner table with less and less to talk about. While career stress was mounting, a much more physical and grueling challenge was about to push their marriage to the breaking point. In 2021, Eamonn began a long and difficult battle with chronic back pain due to 3 slipped discs and a dislocated pelvis that affected both his personal and professional life. The pains were so bad, he had epidural injections to manage the pain. However, the situation became much worse in 2022 when a slipped disc required surgery. Instead of the relief they expected, the operation left Eamonn with significant mobility issues, resulting in him using a wheelchair. This medical crisis forced Ruth into a role she never expected to play full-time. She became a carer while still trying to manage her own demanding career. Their relationship instantly went from a romantic partnership to something that felt more daunting. The romantic spark they once shared was being smothered by the constant reality of medical needs. Eamonn was very open with his fans about how this affected him. He described the chronic pain as soul-destroying. It was not only about the physical ache in his body. The pain also affected his morale and his mood, and Ruth was the one who dealt with the brunt of that frustration at home. She had to balance the intense stress of caregiving with her public persona on Loose Women. On television, she had to be the bubbly and witty woman everyone loved. At home, she was facing a husband in deep physical and emotional distress. The isolation of this period was a lot for both of them. Because Eamonn could not move around easily, their world became very small. They stopped attending the red carpets and parties that had been a staple of their celebrity lifestyle. They were stuck together, facing a reality they never saw coming. These were supposed to be the best years they had worked so hard to achieve, but it slowly became a nightmare for both of them. Ruth began to realize that the future she had imagined was disappearing. The physical toll on Eamonn was creating an emotional distance that was becoming harder to bridge. The partnership that had survived almost 30 years of media pressure was finally buckling under the weight of personal suffering. As the physical pain grew, the emotional distance became wider. And then came the social media silence that spoke volumes. Suspicions of a separation. For a couple that had spent decades sharing their lives with the public, the sudden lack of content was the first real red flag. Fans of the duo began to notice a pattern throughout late 2023 and early 2024. In the past, every birthday, anniversary, and holiday was marked with a cozy photo of them. However, they shared nothing about them on the Christmas of 2023. By the time the new year rolled around, the clues were piling up. Ruth began sharing more of her outings with her inner circle of friends. She was seen at lunches, theater shows, and weekend trips, yet Eamonn was never in the frame. While Ruth appeared to be leaning into her friendships and her work, Eamonn's digital presence took a different turn. He began sharing cryptic messages about loneliness and the importance of finding support in unexpected places. He frequently thanked people for being there for him during his darkest days, but he rarely mentioned his wife. This change signaled to the public that the support system at home might not be as solid as it once was. The UK tabloids quickly picked up on the narrative of them living separate lives. Reporters noticed that they hadn't been photographed together in public for months. On the set of Loose Women, the change was even more obvious. Ruth had built a career on being an open book, often sharing funny stories about Eamonn's habits or their latest household arguments. Suddenly, those stories stopped. She continued to be her professional, bubbly self, but Eamonn's name was scrubbed from her daily conversations. This silence was jarring for viewers who were used to hearing about their life as a unit. Living this double life took a massive psychological toll. On paper, they were still the iconic TV couple of Britain. In reality, they were navigating the messy end of a near 3-decade relationship. Ruth had to put on her makeup and smile for the cameras while knowing her marriage was effectively over. Eamonn had to deal with his physical pain and his career changes without the partner who had been by his side since the late 90s. They were essentially performing a role for the audience while their actual connection had faded to almost nothing. The weight of the secret was becoming too much to carry. They were trapped in a waiting game, trying to figure out the right moment to tell the world that their brand was a thing of the past. The public was left in the dark, but the truth was far more complicated than just growing apart, and it involved a new presence in Eamonn's life. Katie Alexander, a relationship counselor and a mother of 3 who is over 20 years younger than Eamonn, was seen to be involved with the media personality. While the world saw Ruth and Eamonn as a rock-solid unit, a secret friendship was developing in the background. Katie and Eamonn reportedly first connected through social media after he commented on a post of hers. What started as a few digital interactions turned into a deep connection during the time Eamonn was suffering the most from his chronic back pain. As Eamonn's health declined, he felt increasingly isolated. While Ruth was out working long hours at ITV to keep their lifestyle afloat and support their family, Katie was the one emotionally there. Reports surfaced that she would visit him and offer the emotional consolation he felt was missing at home. The optics of this situation were tough for many fans to swallow. They saw Eamonn as ungrateful, knowing that his 64-year-old ex-wife had to juggle both work and taking care of him only to frolic with a younger woman. This created a wedge that would eventually split the marriage wide open. The way Ruth allegedly found out about them was a total shock. According to insiders, Ruth discovered messages between Eamonn and Katie on a shared laptop or phone. Finding those messages was a devastating blow to her. The person she had trusted for nearly 3 decades had broken her trust. Shortly after the divorce was announced, the friendship between Eamonn and his newfound love went public in a big way. Eamonn was spotted on a Mediterranean cruise with Katie, looking more relaxed than he had in years. For the fans who had rooted for Ruth and Eamonn for decades, these images were hard to watch. Ruth, on the other hand, had to watch from the sidelines as the man she spent 27 years with moved on with someone much younger in the full view of the paparazzi. For Ruth, this wasn't just a betrayal of vows, it was a betrayal of the 27 years of loyalty she had poured into him. The hidden reason revealed. While the news of another woman grabbed all the headlines, the real reason for the split went much deeper than a secret friendship. It came down to a simple, painful truth. Ruth had reached her breaking point. For the last 2 years of the marriage, Ruth felt less like a wife and more like a full-time nurse. Sources close to the star say Ruth felt completely taken for granted. While Eamonn was rightfully focused on his own intense physical suffering, he seemed to lose sight of the woman standing right next to him. Ruth was doing a double shift while still being the primary breadwinner. It was mentally and physically exhausting, especially since there was no one taking care of Ruth while she was busy taking care of everyone else. Adding to the strain was the change in Eamonn's personality. People in their circle mentioned that his frustration with his health and his messy exit from ITV turned into a cloud of grumpiness and bitterness. She eventually reached a moment of clarity where she realized she could not save Eamonn from his own misery. She had spent years trying to fix his health and boost his spirits, but she was drowning in the process. She had to make a choice to save herself before there was nothing left of her own identity. When news of Eamonn's new life with a younger woman surfaced, it was a massive blow to her self-worth. After nearly 3 decades of loyalty, seeing him find comfort so quickly with someone else felt like a slap in the face. Yet, it also gave her the final push she needed. At 66 years old, Ruth looked at the road ahead and realized it was now or never. She did not want to spend her remaining years as a shadow of herself or a permanent caregiver to a man who was already looking elsewhere. She decided that 66 was the perfect age to start over and rediscover the woman she was before the world only saw her as one half of a famous duo. She was ready to stop being a caregiver and start being Ruth again. With to spend her remaining years as a shadow of herself or a permanent caregiver, a man who was already looking elsewhere. She decided that 66 was the back in front of the camera. When he returned to his hosting duties at GB News shortly after the announcement, he chose to address the situation head-on. He thanked the viewers for their support and mentioned how much it meant to him. On the surface, it seemed like a standard thank you. To those watching closely, it felt like a subtle jab at Ruth. By publicly thanking his audience for being there, he was hinting that someone else might not have been. He soon began to lean into that specific narrative. In interviews and social media replies, Eamonn started making it clear that he was not the person who wanted this divorce. By positioning himself as the one who was left behind, he effectively painted himself as the victim of the story. He often pointed to his physical condition, suggesting that his health struggles made him a burden that Ruth no longer wanted to carry. This created a wave of sympathy from some fans, while others saw it as a calculated attempt to make Ruth look like the villain for walking away when things got tough. The optics of his new life did not exactly help his case with the skeptics. While he was telling the world he was heartbroken and struggling, photos began to surface of him with Katie Alexander. Seeing a man who claimed to be devastated suddenly enjoying the company of a much younger woman on a holiday was a hard pill for the public to swallow, and he faced backlash for it. Eamonn seemed to adopt a nothing-to-lose attitude. He stopped worrying about protecting the family brand and started speaking with a bluntness that was almost startling. This new, unfiltered version of Eamonn did not sit well with Ruth's inner circle. There were reports of growing tension between him and the other women on Loose Women. Ruth's colleagues are famously protective, and Eamonn's comments about the split were seen as disrespectful to a woman who had spent years as his primary support system. The bridge between him and Ruth's world was not just burned, it was completely dismantled. Every interview he gave seemed designed to stir the pot. He focused on his own pain and his own perspective, rarely acknowledging the toll the last few years had taken on his wife. While Eamonn was as controversial as ever, Ruth was working, and her silence was far more powerful than his words. Life at 66 and beyond. After the news of the divorce was announced, Ruth immediately took an extended hiatus of 2 months from Loose Women. Not only did she take a break from work, but she was also off social media during that time. When she finally made her triumphant return to Loose Women in July 2024, the atmosphere was electric. As she walked onto the set for the first time since the announcement, she was met with a standing ovation from the audience that seemed to go on forever. Her co-stars gathered around her with a level of warmth that felt more like a family reunion than a television segment. People quickly started talking about her revenge glow-up. It wasn't just about her vibrant new outfits or her polished look. There was a fresh energy in her eyes and a lightness in her step that had been missing for a few years. It wasn't just her presenting career that took a turn for good. Her fashion line with QVC became a massive success, proving she had a huge following that existed entirely outside of her marriage. Ruth also leaned heavily on her famous girl squad. Her colleagues weren't just co-workers, they became her shield. They provided the laughter and the support that helped her navigate the transition from wife to single woman. Through it all, her main focus remained on her son, Jack. She wanted to ensure he felt stable and loved while his parents' lives were being picked apart. She managed to keep him out of the mess, showing a level of parental strength that many found admirable. The most impressive part was her refusal to bash Eamonn. Even when he was taking jabs at her or being seen with his new friend, Ruth stayed a class act. She is still redefining what it means to be a divorcee in your late 60s, proving she can survive without him. But what does the future hold for the house they once shared? Moving from a joint life to a separate one is never simple, especially when there are millions of pounds on the table. Their beautiful Surrey mansion, which was the backdrop for so many happy social media posts, now sits at the center of the puzzle. With Eamonn moving out of the mansion into an apartment in London, closer to the GB News studios. One of the most emotional parts of their split is also about their dog, Maggie. For years, Maggie was a constant presence in their videos and photos. She was like a second child to them. Deciding who gets primary custody of the dog is a surprisingly tough point in any divorce. And for Ruth and Eamonn, it represents the final break in their daily routine. While they figure out the house and the pets, the impact on their family continues to ripple outward. Their son, Jack, and Eamonn's children from his first marriage have to navigate a new reality where the two anchors of their family are no longer docked at the same port. There has been plenty of talk about Ruth writing a tell-all book. While a memoir would surely be a bestseller, it seems unlikely given her track record of keeping things dignified. Meanwhile, a major question remains about Eamonn's future. With his mobility still a daily struggle, the world wonders who will take on the role of his primary caregiver now that Ruth has stepped away. With the two presenters now officially separated, whose side are you on in this daytime drama? Do you think Ruth was right to walk away after 27 years, or did Eamonn deserve more loyalty during his health crisis? Let us know in the comments below. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss any of our videos. Thanks for watching.